Hi, my name is Paul, and this is Manifesto. And you might have noticed that recently I haven't been putting so much new content out on the channel as I used to do. And the reason for that is that I'm really been wrestling with which direction that I want to go. Part of that is related to I've recently been talking a lot to Orthodox priests, and I had the experience a couple of times of going into a church where I didn't know anybody in Orthodox church and having people just recognizing me out of the blue and maybe even treating me as if I was some kind of spiritual authority. And to tell you the truth, I'm really not any kind of spiritual authority. I'm just another guy who, only fairly recently, 5 years ago, converted to Orthodoxy and struggling still to get the basics right in my own spiritual life. And therefore, with this channel, I've been thinking that I really want to focus more on the homestead, the place where I live here, and the activities that are happening here, hopefully to get more people to come out here with my work situation. And so, kind of out of the blue, this guy called Gregory Diehl, who was an author, wrote to me and asked if I wanted to do an interview. And he looked like a really good bridging figure because he's actually himself, about the same time as me, moved out into the countryside, not in Denmark, but in Armenia, of all places. But this guy, he has a really different perspective on life and society and current events compared to me. What I would call something like American liberalism. So while there was many things that I really disagreed with him about, then there were also elements in his work where it seems like he was starting to look in some of the directions that had really been helpful for me in moving my life forward and gaining a broader perspective on life as well. And this was, of course, particularly in relationship to women. So I decided to have a chat with Gregory and try and engage with some of these ideas, looking at kind of both differences and agreements, disagreements and agreements, and see if we can learn something from each other as well. So I hope that you find it interesting, and here we go with Gregory. Gregory Diehl, thanks for joining me. Great to have you on here. Did I pronounce your name right? Diehl,
You
is that
did.
the
You
right?
did. Like, let's make a deal or deal with it.
Yeah, let's see if we can make a
Yeah.
deal or get into the deal of things.
Or the ideal, which is appropriate for the title of my book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a pretty well-known author or a very accomplished author. How many books? Is it seven that
This
you've
is my seventh book, and
seventh book?
my eighth is already in the works, and I have many more planned after that. So it definitely kind of fallen into a stride with it.
Yeah. So I said yes to having a conversation with you because it seems like you've written some interesting books, but also it seems like there's some really interesting parallels in your kind of life journey and what you're up to and what I've been doing. Because 4 years ago, I bought a very, very old house out of the Danish countryside, and I'm busy putting it together with my wife, and I have two kids out here. But you bought now a center 5 years ago in Al Armenia.
Yes,
I
Yeah.
said it right this time, not Albania, Armenia, which I've looked into since I've found, looked in. It's a fascinating country, tiny little place that one tends to forget there. But
Yeah, most people just know it because of the Kardashians. But
uh-huh.
there's actually a very ancient history and lots of interesting culture and art and religious. It was the world's first Christian country.
Yeah.
And it's got a long history of conflict. The Armenian genocide preceded the Jewish Holocaust we all know about. And
Yeah.
yeah, but nowadays it's just this tiny little country that hardly anyone knows anything about. It's like I've disappeared off the face of the earth here.
Yeah. And you're even further out in the countryside in a small little village out there,
Yeah.
and have created a retreat center where you have people coming and doing kind of workaway retreats, it sounds like. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a story behind it which actually ties into one of my books. So I was a nomad for about 10 years, from 18 to 30 roughly. I was traveling around the world even before digital nomads were a big thing. I got started in 2007, right after I finished high school, right?
Hmm.
And after you adapt that lifestyle for so long, living out of a suitcase, being adaptable, just showing up in a new place and adjusting, which is its own skill set that, I got very good at. Eventually, it's like I grew up and decided it was time for the opposite. Like, what if I plant my roots in one place and try to become a member of a community and build up things around me and commit to one location?
Hmm.
I had some ancestry in Armenian. My grandmother was Armenian. I had citizenship here through the family connection. And I heard about this village called Calavan that was promoting itself as a place of economic empowerment. Like they wanted to teach the locals modern business principles, teach them to be business owners, increase tourism and industry here. And that was something I had a professional background in many of the developing countries that I traveled to. And so I met with the politicians who were promoting this village, and they seemed to love me. I'd already written my first business book and some other things, and they showed me there was one dilapidated house left for sale in the village for $7,000 on 1 acre of land. People still like lose their minds when I tell them I got a house for $7,000, but it was in the worst possible condition, you know. And and I said, well, this is it then. This is obviously where I belong. This is where I can do what I wanted to do. And it wasn't until after I moved in that I realized that it was basically propaganda. Um, but it was a story being told by politicians that got them some funding that made the village sound really good, made the politicians sound really successful. And beyond that, it was honestly like these people didn't even know the meaning of the words they were using when talking about business and entrepreneurship and economics. It was like they just heard that they sounded good to modern Western progressive audiences and started saying, "Hey, that's what we do. We love that stuff." And it's just completely untrue. And that was what inspired my fifth book called Everyone is an Entrepreneur Selling Economic Self-Determination in a Post-Soviet World. So I wrote that 3 years after I moved here, and it was kind of the frustrations and just surprises I faced trying to, like, what would it actually get these people to start thinking entrepreneurially and to understand the things that generally we take for granted in the West is just being obviously true. Like tradesmen who don't own their own tools because that was just not part of their culture. Your employer provides you with tools and you use them the way it does. It's like nobody would ever think to buy their own tools and offer their services on a freelance basis and build up a workshop and hire employees. Like they just don't see the logical connection between these kinds of things, or like they see money as like a necessary evil to avoid whenever possible. And it's just been really quite amazing to see how these people think and live even 30 years after the Soviet Union and communism ended.
Mhm. I'm sorry, I have a baby alarm here and it just made a
Okay,
noise. I'm
sure.
going to have to just put this on pause for a second.
To tie that into what I'm doing now, 5 years after I moved here, most of that time was just spent refurbishing the house and making it nice and modern. And since I realized I couldn't really do what I originally envisioned coming here to do, but I'd already built up this reputation for myself as this interesting American author. I'd written this book now about this village, about economic empowerment, and I was starting to get a lot of attention. And I had this nice, modern, big house now. What do I do with it? And what I came up with was a personal development retreat center slash international community. And we've currently got about 9 people in the house from 4 or 5 different countries, some from neighboring like Iran and Turkey, and some that come from East Asia and some that come from America and the West.
Mhm.
And so it's a social experiment now in community building and also trying to now teach the kinds of principles that I originally wanted to teach to the locals and see if people can come here for a co-living experience that transforms them as people emotionally and intellectually.
Sounds like a really interesting place and
Yeah.
absolutely filling a need that I find many people are searching for community and connection and understanding in a confusing, hyper
Yeah.
like globalized world.
And
And I'd
especially
also
in
say
in this
kudos to you
space.
for sticking it out there and
Yeah.
not just like, what
Yeah.
the hell, I'm getting out of here. But like, kind of like think, okay, well, what can I do in this place? Like that must be really something to be coming from a California and then to a tiny little village out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, yeah, I left California, San Diego when I was 18, and since then I've been to about 56 countries, the poorest and the richest in pretty much every place you can imagine. So I'm not just a Californian, I'm quite a global person now, right? But still, even I was surprised at many of the difficulties I encountered here. And that's when I originally kind of arrived at the idea that I started seeing this as a little America, which if you look on our website and if you drive down the road to us, you'll see an American flag along with an Armenian flag hanging off our balcony. And by that, I don't mean anything related to the politics of America. I mean the original idea of America as this international melting pot. The first time a nation was founded on values. not on racial background, not on tradition, not on arbitrary land borders, but on people who value liberty, people who want to exchange and interact in a mutually beneficial way that's never been done before, where you contribute your strengths for the benefit of everyone, no matter where you come from. And we're open-minded and don't judge and don't bias and prejudice. And a country like Armenia, with all the good things I've said about it, their long sense of ancient tradition and culture makes them very close-minded to change and progress, right? And so this is can be a very judgmental place, and we don't try to force change on anyone, but we welcome people who need a place to be welcomed, and that gradually changes the mindsets of the people around them, kind of opens their mind to things they wouldn't have considered before, especially the young people.
Okay. Yeah. So what I wanted to do with this conversation is to dig into some of the ideas that I've seen through your work, and also touch on some of the things that you've mentioned here as well. Um, the way I see it is, I'm just another guy finding his way as well. And it's a really interesting time in the world's history right now. We've just had American elections.
Hmm.
I'm really noticing, and I'm sure you are too, there's a war going on in Europe at the moment. I have a lot of Ukrainians that are in my personal close circle of friends, so I'm kind of impacted and influenced by that. And I grew up in South Africa, also done a lot of traveling, probably visited, I haven't counted them, but a good 50 countries or something like that. Did a lot of solo traveling for some time as well. Um, and for a long time, I think I saw America as like, the heart of civilization and the kind of
Hmm.
flagship. That was the place that I was most excited about. I read all
Yeah.
American culture and books and stories. I grew up on like Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and those kinds of things, which I'm sure you've also.
I've got a shelf full of Asimov's books here. Our
Yeah,
guests
yeah.
read
Well,
them.
then you're
So.
more into him than I have, but I really definitely enjoyed it. Um, and Yeah, so I ended up working for Microsoft actually for a good 8 years. Had a job where I was kind of coordinating their global environmental sustainability strategy for all of the subsidiaries outside of the United States. And so really felt like I kind of, on a personal level, reached a lot of the goals that I was aiming for.
Hmm.
And the more that I did this and kind of joined what I would say was today call like kind of like some kind of like cosmopolitan globalist elite, is that I was selling my soul to I'd basically become a suit, and I was going around talking to like politicians down in Brussels and
Hmm.
corporate vice presidents and of big companies and stuff like that, and it was really all just a lot of hot air to a large extent. And at the same time that this was happening, then I came from a far more traditional background. I noticed that the very solid things at the center of my life, like family, were actually crumbling and dissolving at the same time. Um, Amongst other things, my understanding of being a man and how I was supposed to be with women as well was one of the
Hmm.
issues that I was facing. I, looking back at it now, I didn't treat women very well. I had a pretty negative idea about women, and I wasn't using my sexuality in a productive way either. Probably fueled by all kinds of, bad uses of it and misdirection of it. And so that led me into a long spiritual search. And, I've found now a home. And I mentioned to you earlier, I've converted to Orthodox Christianity and kind of really settled down in a far more slow and withdrawn portion of society out in a tiny little village in Denmark. And today, I can't help but feel that there is, if I look at like the global stage and everything that's happening, then there's like a little bit of a clash of civilizations happening. And what I see is this American project, as you said, founded on the ideals of liberty.
Hmm.
It was especially set up to liberate human beings from kind of oppressive collectives,
Yep.
collectivities that would kind of limit individual self-expression and stop people from just being fully their authentic self, and to give them full freedom to do whatever they wanted. And so I feel that we this is like Francis Fukuyama has published this book about the end of history, after the defeat of the Soviet Union, that kind of like that it won the liberalism won over communism, and liberalism has then kind of continued to be progressing more and more, and so has been looking to liberate us from more and more things. And and it's gone and for a lot of people, I think it's gone too far. And so what I've seen in my life as well is that um, it became this kind of narcissistic, hedonistic, constant search for new and innovative things.
Consumerism, essentially. The
And
Amazon
yeah,
Prime
well,
mentality.
definitely consumerism was a big part of it. But then to relate it to your book as well, yeah, so consumerism is a very good approach. So I went into your YouTube channel and looked at one of the videos, and it was a talk you gave at the Ayn Rand Association, I think, where
Yeah, here in Armenia, the Ayn
yeah,
Rand
yeah,
Center in
here, yeah, in
Armenia.
Armenia,
Yeah.
yeah. So you said something like, all people should, I'm just paraphrasing, but like people should study economic theory because it helps you to understand how this is a framework where you can see all of life,
Hmm.
and every single human interaction is a kind of a economic transaction actually, and you're always getting value and exchanging value
Yeah.
in every single interaction. And so for me, like I can see that that is a perspective that one can put onto all of life. But for me,
Hmm.
actually, that's been a big part of the problem, because what it led to was a kind of instrumentalization and objectification of other human beings in my interactions with them. But it is this Americanized entrepreneurial mindset that I feel comes in this culture, and that stops me from seeing human beings as an ends in themselves, as in like human relationships, which is what I really see today is like the most important thing in my life, is that there's this kind of like almost divine quality to real human connection that nourishes my soul, and that I tend not to see anymore the more that I view people through a more, entrepreneurial. And I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. I've been a self-employed, for pretty much my entire life and had many different businesses. Um, um, it really alienated and isolated me from other human beings.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
And that is a common counter argument or problem that people bring up, and it's unfortunate that particularly the Europeans, that's like how they associate Americans, like just consumerists, kind of immature, self-centered. Um, and what you're describing, like, well, isn't it a bit dehumanizing to see all human interactions as economic? And I'd say that's probably oversimplifying it because it's like learning physics, right? Physics exists whether or not you know anything about it, whether or not you actively acknowledge it in any given situation. In the physical universe we exist in, all physical things are subject to the laws of physics. Now, learning those things, learning the math and all the complex dynamics and relationships between things can be fascinating. It can be very useful. We can build things that we never could have imagined before. We can go to the moon and come back. And how much you should learn about that and how much you should actively be thinking about it really just depends on how useful it is to your goals, right? Does that
Mhm.
mean you have to see everything that ever happens around you as a series of physics equations? Right? Does that ruin the magic? Does that unweave the rainbow, as I think Dawkins put it? Like, does learning about the light spectrum make the beauty of a rainbow somehow less beautiful? And it's the same thing with human behavior and human interactions and human choice. Every choice anybody ever makes is economic in the sense that they're always seeking to gain something that they perceive most closely aligns with their values and will bring them to the highest state of satisfaction. Now, that might sound technical and weird and dehumanizing and and you could definitely view it that way, where it's just like, well, I love my wife and take care of her because only because I believe in the economic exchange she will give me in return, or you can just say it is, my priority, my highest value is loving my wife and supporting my family, and I will make choices strategically that support that goal, and those will necessarily be economic in nature. How do I achieve the highest amount of what I subjectively consider valuable for the minimum losses, right? And money is not even necessarily part of that. Money is a medium of exchange that you don't even have to use, but that often is quite convenient to use, right? So that's where I think it becomes most consumerist and disappointing when you try to put a price tag on everything. What is the love of your children worth to you? How much money would you pay for that, right? But it really, we only use money just when it's the most convenient way to exchange something with someone else. But if there are easier ways to get things done where we don't necessarily need to put a price on things, we don't. Most of the exchanges we have with other people do not involve money, and we just don't think of them in those terms. Money is really useful when I'm dealing with strangers and we need some way to agree upon a fair interaction between us so that we both feel like we're gaining from it, right? So it's really an oversimplification to say, well, it just reduces everything to a price tag or anything like that.
Well, it doesn't have to reduce it, but I'd say it tends towards quantifiability and materialism. And those are obviously the foundational assumptions behind economic theory is that things can be
Mhm.
quantified and analyzed with a kind of logical scientific
Sure,
mindset.
but
Um,
economic theory does not require you to value anything. It helps you quantify the things you do value, but what you find most valuable will always be a bit different than what I consider most valuable or the man down the street, and that's what makes economic exchange possible, that we all value things differently and we can exchange so that we're all attempting to get the most of what we
yeah.
particularly value.
So, I mean, obviously, there's some benefit in economic theory, but I would posit that taking it into the realm of, human relationship building, for example, is a step too far because there are other fields of inquiry and understanding which I think are, getting lost. And there are ones which are far more, what would I say? Yeah, just they've been used for a lot longer time and have proven to be more successful in
Okay,
creating
like what?
stable.
Spirituality, philosophy.
Well, for example, yeah, I definitely say like religious traditions have had at their heart to um, facilitate some kind of loving interactions between human beings. That's been the core of religion.
Okay.
For time, whereas economics shows some of in our current society can show some of the signs of trying to become a religious system in some ways,
Mhm.
with kind of dogmas as well, that need to be accepted. And there's really big fights, of course, about some of them as well. But there are some underlying assumptions about the nature of reality that I think don't get looked at a lot of the time because it assumes a specific, like, what is a human being? Well, a human being is a value maximizer, right? It's a
Yeah,
person who
it's
who
or it's a volitional agent of an entity that makes choices in the pursuit of
Yeah,
it
and
what it
and it's
values,
always the
right? Yeah.
individual, so it's also it assumes human beings as being separate from each other and
Hmm.
individualized and fragmented, and that often there's a case of like you can have synergy, but when you have this tendency towards quantification, then you normally also see like, more for me, less for you kind of thing as well. At least that's a very big inherent risk in the whole, that's the problem
Well,
with the
you're
the
kind of getting
commons,
into
right?
the definition of love, which might spill over into my most recent book, but in
Yeah.
the book that I initially reached out to you about that is releasing in just a few days, November 19th, International Men's Day, called The Romantic Ideal, the highest standard of romance for a man. In there, I define love as a shared sense of identification, which can
Hmm.
take many different forms, and romantic love in particular is defined by passion, because you can love your kids and your parents and your friends, but you don't typically have a burning passion for them, which gets into intimacy and sexuality. But what you're saying there about like the way we identify as individuals, which can be conflicting and there can be synergy, well, when you love someone in any form, what you're really saying is that you identify with them. You consider them an extension of yourself, and hopefully they do the same with you.
Hmm.
And so that synergy is like us working toward some kind of shared goal, some kind of shared value hierarchy, even if we never explicitly say so.
Hmm.
You love your wife, I presume, right? Can I
Hmm.
can I make that assumption of you? Right.
Let's say I love my wife. I'm learning to love my wife, and yeah, I'm learning to love my wife, and I love my wife. Yeah,
And would you say that you largely have shared goals and a shared value hierarchy with your wife, which probably includes your children? How many children do you have?
I have two boys, and
Two.
I have a son from a previous relationship, so there's three in all, but two that
Okay,
are living with us.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, that certainly you both love your children and you would consider them near the top, if not at the very top of your values and your priorities in life. And if you didn't share that priority, it would probably be really difficult to have a harmonious family together, right? Because there would constantly be a clash of wants and values and senses of satisfaction, right?
I
And
definitely agree with
yeah.
this line of thinking. Like there needs to be something very specific and concrete at the top of your value hierarchy, and the idea of shared identity goes to the heart of what love is. I think it's actually a good perspective. It's not one I've heard so explicitly before, but I think it makes good sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you die for your wife or your children?
I don't think it's possible to know that for sure until I was in the situation.
If
I
you
would like to
would.
say yes. I'd like to say that's my job or my responsibility. but I don't know if I'm able to say that. But I do believe that I will do everything I can to be the kind of man. I'm doing everything I can to be the kind of man who would die for his wife and his child, and I believe that's actually a requirement of being a husband and a father, is to be
Sure.
able to do that kind of
And
thing.
do you presume that your wife would probably die for your children too?
I don't presume, but I know that she would hold that as a value. She would put their
Yeah,
lives higher than our own.
if a car is coming for your kid in the middle of the street, you have no time to think or react. All you can do is throw yourself in front and push the kid out of the way and sacrifice your life to save theirs. Don't you think instinctually that's probably what you'd do without thinking about it, right?
I think that's probably what both of us would do. Yeah.
See, I just see that as an extension of your self-preservation instinct. The same instinct that would tell you to jump out of the way of a moving car without thinking about it tells you to jump in front of a moving car because you see yourself in your child out there. You say that car is going to hit me, right? So that same instinct that would tell you to preserve your own body is now doing the same thing to tell you I have to protect me. That's me there, right there. That's about to get hit by that car. So you
Mhm.
value them even above your own life because it's an extension of your survival instinct. That's
I
full
wouldn't classify it as a
implication.
survival instinct. For me, there's something definitely different at work there. I've had a period of my life where I've been very caught up in my own selfish needs. And so while it's nice to be able to say I would have always done this for, let's say I have an 18-year-old son, and for part of his life, I wasn't, for his younger years, I wasn't a present father. And so when I couldn't even get myself together to, have him every second weekend, just staying at my house, and
Hmm.
organize my life to make sure I prioritize that, then, it's like I would have liked to say like, yeah, and maybe you're right. There's some kind of instinctual thing that would have kicked in, but I also think that people freeze in fear and have all kinds of other things happening inside of themselves, and so. I think if you're not sacrificing yourself daily for your children and your family, there's a good chance that when push comes to shove and you're in that situation in the heat of the moment, you're not sharpened in that way to actually be loving. So there's all kinds of other things that are running your instincts as well. And so one of them is just freezing, for example. And so
Hmm.
that for a lot of parents, and has happened, obviously, many parents have stood there while something terrible has happened to their children, because of fear or all kinds of other things
Yeah,
as
some
well.
kind of internal conflict.
Yeah, some kind of internal conflict. So I really believe that it's not just a self-preservation instinct, but it's actually a virtue that needs to be trained and developed inside the human being, and you train it every single day of your life. When you wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, your child's crying. Do you get angry and upset, and or feel like, oh, get filled with self-pity, or you just say, oh, well, it's my job to stand up and look after
Yeah.
my kid and
This
and,
is
and
the
look after
life I
his needs.
chose. These are the responsibilities I took on because this is the kind of man I am. This is what I care about.
Yeah, because if I can't even sacrifice, an hour of sleep in the middle of the night, am I really able to then sacrifice my life when the need comes for it? I'm not sure. Not sure. Yeah. So I again, I grew up with a very loving family. My parents very much sacrificed themselves every day, for me, I think, and gave a good example. But I kind of like went off on my adventures and saw myself as, it's all about, maximizing my own take and having the most powerful experiences. And I think that to a certain extent, I weakened that ability in myself to really love and to experience this kind of human connection that would give himself for somebody else. And so I'm trying to relearn and get hold of those things again a day, which I would just call virtues. It's hard to say something, but I'd say there's something uniquely human about them. I don't think other animals have something like virtue. I think they just do operate
Mm.
much more on instincts,
Yeah.
whereas I do believe human beings aren't just
Well,
rational
virtue requires
animals.
choice and self-knowledge,
Yeah,
right? The choice to align yourself most closely with what you value, which I call heroism. Essentially, what does it mean to be a hero? It's
yeah,
hero. It's
yeah.
to
This is the
struggle
third book
and
that's
suffer.
I thought was
Yes.
yeah. You're great. You're moving us along better than I am here.
I'm very good at self-promotion.
Yeah, and you're a more structured thinker than I am, perhaps, seeing as you get to write down all your thoughts and I just talk about them too much.
It is a very good intellectual exercise to be able to structure, hundreds of pages of thoughts on a subject. And that's some advice I give when I work with other authors too. Most people don't really have a writing problem in the sense like, oh, I can't sit here and type on my keyboard, right? They have a thinking problem, right?
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
they can't quite figure out what exactly they're trying to say in the order they're trying to say it in, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
solve that, it becomes a lot easier to get the
So
book
right.
out there and edit it optimally.
Absolutely. Well, definitely something that it seems like you've done well. Okay, so the heroic you were talking about.
Yes, so that's the third book.
Hmm.
The Heroic and Exceptional Minority, which
Hmm.
uh, I subtitle is A Guide to Mythological Self-Awareness and Growth. And it's a series of lessons I certainly had to learn the hard way, mostly while I was doing like that travel around the world and exposing myself to difficult, extreme, unconventional, challenging, surprising situations. After 50 countries, there are still things that surprise me about the world, right? Like even moving here to Armenia, I was shocked like that they didn't understand basic entrepreneurial concepts, that kind of thing. Um, and it's how to live essentially as somebody who does not conform to the mold, who has never really identified with mainstream wants and values, never really categorized yourself the same way as other people. That's where that term exceptional comes from. Someone who
Hmm.
is notably different than the norm, and therefore the general guidelines and rules that apply to other people won't necessarily apply to you, which includes things like what would you find to be a fulfilling life? Are you just going to get a career and go to school and get married and have 2.5 kids because it's what everyone around you is doing? Or is it actually in line with your fundamental self and your deepest values? Those are two very different ways to make that kind of choice. And so the exceptional person doesn't really have the luxury of just defaulting to cultural norms around them. They have to go through a process of deep self-inquiry to figure out, well, am I this? Am I that? Am I something else? Until they can be pretty certain that they've kind of circled around the answer and say, yeah, this is it. This is what is true and unchanging about me under all possible conditions. This is who I am.
Hmm. Yeah. So I've been running a group called Manifesto Core for some time. It's a network of online groups where it caters for men. They sign up for a group, and it's about men trying to figure out who they are and where they want to go. So it's
Yeah.
actually for exactly the kind of guys who are asking these questions and trying to find their direction through that. And I would actually go so far as to say that, pretty much everybody has to do this. The consequence of not doing it is anxiety, depression, some kind of collapse. The longer you put it off, the worse it gets. Everybody goes through it sometimes. So I think, bet in previous times we better at people doing it as a teenager. Like it's when they kind of like they have to figure out who they are. But I think that there's been an overly reliance on mainstream culture to just kind of follow the stream as you
Yeah.
as you pointed out.
Let
Uh,
society make your most important choices for you to spare
yeah,
you the burden.
yeah. I think for my own sake, I can say computer games and porn was a really negative influence there, and that kind of like
Yeah.
that drive to be exceptional, to really think about things properly and deeply was blunted because my energy got poured into computer games and pornography kind of took away the sexual drive to be able to connect with
Hmm.
a woman as well to get out there. And so that was a very, I still ended up getting out there and doing a whole lot of stuff, but I think I would have gone deeper and further if I hadn't have had those two things. To be a hero, you can be a hero in these computer games. It feels like you're getting, it's a very
Yeah.
plastic,
Well,
artificial
both
way.
of those things, video games and porn, kind of just give you that instant sense of reward, right? That instant stimulation that you so desperately need. Excitement or sexual excitement in the case of porn. So instead of saying, oh my God, I'm so attracted to this woman, I want to do everything for her to win her attention or affection or approval, you just say, oh, she's hot and I can see her naked anytime I want. Craving satisfied, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't have to deal with the actual complexity of another human being
Yeah.
getting into, which I thought was, I read the forward of the book on the romantic
Yeah.
man. And I
The
thought that
the
was
one written by Svetlana Savak, a
yeah,
very wise feminine woman I collaborate with a lot.
yeah.
Um, I said to you before, like in for most books, the forward to the book is kind of like an optional introduction. Most of the time, you could probably just skip over it. But with this, I feel like it's an essential part of the message of the book because the book is written from a very, very masculine and in that regard limited perspective because I can't see the world from the feminine perspective except through women I've known and interacted with intimately, right? And so
Mhm.
I needed that sense of collaboration that here's a very feminine woman. She's a registered psychotherapist in Toronto. And
Mhm.
so she's worked with some pretty interesting conditions with couples and people with trauma. And so to collaborate with her while I was editing this book and get her highly feminine perspective, someone like her who's very, very good at articulating her thoughts, probably the best in that regard, the most articulate woman I've ever known. And for us to come from very different perspectives, the masculine and the feminine, and find where we agree on these fundamental concepts, even though we approach them so differently. Or like most men, when they read the book, will just like nod consciously, say, "Yep, yep, I get exactly what you're talking about." And many women that I've shown it to have been just really surprised, like, "Oh my God, is this really how men see women, or is this really what it's like to be a man?" And that's kind of why I wanted to write the book too, is like to show
Mhm.
this is our experience of realities, particularly if we're romantically oriented men. This is how we view sex. This is how we view intimacy. This is the things we struggle with that you probably never think about, right? And so then to run this by her, this very articulate, very intelligent, feminine woman, and she says, "Yeah, I've always known that about men. I see the way you act. I see how it's different than us, and here's how we are more as women." And so there's this dynamic interplay kind of between our
Mhm.
perspectives that you can see throughout the book, even after the foreword that she wrote, that she definitely helped a lot with the editing and the organization throughout the
Mhm.
book.
Yeah. Yeah. So my kind of life course led very much. And I came from a traditional background and moved to Denmark. And in Denmark, equality, equity is put at a very high level. I studied political science at Copenhagen University, and every single subject there, we had to have the feminist perspective. It was mandated that there had to be the feminist perspective
Mhm.
on every, if it was, sociology or like state budgeting, it had to be the feminist perspective on everything. Um, and so this kind of like alternative viewpoint was very strongly represented. And I kind of sometimes I felt like, oh my gosh, sounds really strange and ideological. Sometimes I really denigrated my background because I kind of thought, well, everything's better here in Denmark and we're much more enlightened and progressive and, modern or whatever, things where I saw them as maybe very backward from my own childhood, and that kind of thing. So when I read that book of yours, then I saw you kind of stepping more into, and I guess it's also in the book about the heroic and exceptional minority, but more into a kind of like a traditional mythological, kind of framework and some ideas there. I'm not sure if I really connected with all the concepts that were put forward there. Some of the ideas about what the feminine is, what the masculine is, and how they interact with each other. One thing that has been really central for me that I think is completely forgotten in our culture is the importance of motherhood.
Mhm.
When I look at what, for our lives now, my wife and I, then we found like, you underlined earlier the importance of like your own children and the next generation. And I think we're in a society which is so focused on their own self-realization, as a man, as a woman, or whatever it is in your career and all these other things, that we don't prioritize this to the same level, being parents. And I have a 1.5-year-old now. We've actually just got him to stop getting breast milk, and that's taken quite a bigger effort from dad. But
Mhm.
that's meant that also for the first 1.5 years of his life, his mom had a role in his life which I couldn't play. And there was a bonding that happened between them, which was incredibly important. I do some individual sessions with guys who are on Manifesto Core, and I just spoke to a guy today whose mother died when he was 11 years old. And he his father was far more intellectual and not as warm. And he never cuddled with his dad. He always cuddled with his mom. And so he
Mhm.
has this massive, massive lack in his family of not having a mother who was there from he was 11 years old. He has older siblings, and the older siblings, they kind of were already on their way out, so they never had this lack. But for him, he's still struggling with this, as you know, in his 30s today, of not having that close, soft, motherly touch and kind of all embracing, or yeah, the kind of love that doesn't require anything from you, as well. For me, a paternal love is one which has expectations. It sets standards,
Yeah.
and it can even criticize because it's trying to lift up, to grow, to encourage growth. While as the maternal love is the one that just holds you and accepts you for what you are.
Yeah. Um, while I was writing the book, and I had a lot of beta readers, which is people who read the incomplete version of the book and give critical feedback. Some people loved it. Some people, like feminists, modern European feminists, hated parts of it. Absolutely. Even though throughout the book, I would say I'm actually much more critical of men than women, though I am critical of both in many regards, but and in many times I say, look at all the horrible things men have done to women and continue to do to women,
Mhm.
but sometimes when I would talk about like how women are and how women act, even when I wasn't being overtly critical, just like describing femininity as I see it, a lot of
Mhm.
them just like, oh, how dare you say women have to act that way? I'm not saying they have to. I'm just saying in general, that's a more feminine way of
Yeah.
being, right? And
Yeah.
we ran into this circularity issue, which was, well, you can't just define masculinity as the way men are, and you can't just define femininity as the way women are, because of course there are always exceptions. Men can have feminine traits, women can have masculine traits. There are some women who are more masculine than feminine. There are some men who are more feminine than masculine. But
Mhm.
in general, those traits we call masculine are more overrepresented in men, and those traits we call feminine are more overrepresented in women. It's just some kind of natural biological division of traits between our sexes. That's the way we've evolved, as far as I
Yeah.
can tell. And of course, social conditioning plays a huge part in it too, but that doesn't account for all of it. There still is a natural differentiation between us
Would
besides
you only
sex.
use the evolution argument, or like, wouldn't you say that there's something even more fundamental to the division of the sexes than evolution? It seems, if you just like look at like, you know, it's far more primordial than that. Like you have the sun and the moon seem to have
Yeah,
masculine, feminine traits.
right.
Language has masculine, feminine traits. Like it's in the nature of reality. I think it's a
Yes,
cop
the
out to
the
say it's a product of
duality,
evolution.
the complementary opposites, essentially. That's why there's a yin yang
Yeah.
on the cover
Yeah.
of my book, because
Yeah.
essentially we're breaking reality into two abstract opposites. And the
Mhm.
way I categorize it in the book is I say that broadly speaking, masculinity is more oriented with conception, or what we might call abstraction or thought, and
Mhm.
femininity is more concerned with experience or feeling. So even the types of love you were just describing, how with women it's more of just this presence, this accepting, warm, loving presence. I would call
Mhm.
that feeling or experiencing. And with
Mhm.
men, it's more like an ideal, a standard you're meant to live up to. And that's how I show my love for you, by helping you be the best you could possibly be, not just as you are right now, but everything you're capable of becoming. That's a very masculine way to love. That's an abstraction. That's a conception of the future, right? That's a very masculine way to look at life. And you
Mhm.
need both of those, right? But unless you're like perfectly androgynous, 50-50, which I believe some people may be, they're very, very neutral and don't identify very strongly with either masculinity or femininity. But most people are going to identify much more strongly with one of those versus the other. And men are more likely going to identify with that conception and abstraction, and women are going to more likely going to identify with the feeling and experiencing, right? And the
Yeah.
question becomes, how do we unify? How do we synergize so that we play appropriate roles in each other's lives for everyone's benefit?
Yeah, not least our children. And I think trying to cater for the feminists and all of their conceptual stuff, I think it's kind of losing pace. Some of those ways of thinking, I guess. I will say, like you, I don't, when I started this work some 8, 9 years ago, I actually was also got involved in an organization which is a men's rights organization, who were kind of like, in the kind of political sphere and trying to talk about like ways that men are oppressed, I guess, and
Hmm.
disadvantaged. I think part of that, what I experienced there was like a lot of guys who are hurt and often through injustice, I
Yeah.
guess, but still carrying a lot of anger with them as well and driven by anger,
Yeah.
and
They hold a
especially
grudge
through
against women because some
holding a
women have
grudge against women.
mistreated
Yeah,
them,
as many
or
women have grudges against men in the world of feminists as well, right?
sure.
Our experience, often like have been unfairly treated, but I think like we've unfortunately moved as a society away from a culture of kind of like repentance and self criticism towards indignation and looking at everybody else's faults. And so I think that's
Yeah.
part of it.
Maybe that's when
But
it becomes
I'd also say like,
pathological.
so the whole Me Too phenomenon, I'm more and more also saying that, we're in a society where, and again, for me, this is another one of my criticisms of liberalism, is that in the liberal project of kind of liberating us from all kinds of collective identities, then, they're trying to liberate us to a certain extent from any kind of, gender identity, but also from any kind of collective agreement on sexuality, that you can just do whatever you want kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I think that the natural result of that is chaos. It is, very unregulated behavior. And so I think we need to have that conversation again, because we've just assumed that, we can just go out and whatever you want to do is completely fine. Um, and people will always be able to speak out about what they don't want and set their own boundaries or something like that. But I think I'm not seeing evidence of that, and I think that there's a whole generation of people who are very confused about it at the moment, about like how they're supposed to use and direct that sexual energy in a productive way. It's the core example that many guys are struggling with, I think, under the surface, that unfortunately we're really bad at talking about as men as well. I mean, guys really.
Yeah, that's a timeless challenge. In an imperfect or a non-ideal world, how do you maintain your ideals instead of kind of devolving into cynicism? If you have very, very high standards for anything in life, it's very likely that you're going to be disappointed, that you are not going to live to see your ideals manifested. Now, you're going to
Mhm.
let that break you and destroy you and say, well, fuck my ideals, then the world's fucked up and it's never going to work and I'm never going to be happy. Or is that going to motivate you that to hold on to your ideals even stronger? That in an imperfect, unideal world, it's important that somebody still holds that standard and is willing to do everything possible to maintain that.
Mhm. Well, especially if that someone is yourself, I guess that's something you can control, right? I've noticed in myself, like I have this tendency often to focus much more on other people's failures to maintain what I think is correct action. Um, and living in a foreign country, it's very easy for me to fixate on the problems and issues with that country, which are often very real as well. Danes have a massive, massive trust of the state. And so any problems there is, oh, well, then we just have to pay some more taxes and then the government's going to solve it for
Oh
us.
my
We just
God.
throw more money at
Yeah.
it and the government's going to do everything for us, right? And the problem is, like, I've worked for a little while in a center for kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, or who are struggling and maybe have been in crime. And these kids are sick and tired of people just throwing money at them, trying to solve their problems for them. What they're looking for is human connection, and what they have is just employees from the state who aren't at all interested. They're just storing kids, basically, right? And not at all solving the problems. So so it's easy for me to fixate on all the problems there is in Denmark, but what I realize more and more, it's like, well, the only thing I can actually do anything about is myself. And if I actually do solve my own problems, um, then people will be coming to me looking for those solutions, and they'll naturally be that kind of community around me that's going to
Mhm.
radiate and send out those values that I'm looking to promote in the world.
In stories like the classic hero's journey, which is something I reference a lot in the heroic and exceptional minority, the hero of the story, the protagonist, the Luke Skywalker character, is, I'm assuming you've seen Star Wars because everyone has,
Yeah,
but
yeah, of course, I've seen Star Wars.
is usually, like someone young who's unsure of himself, who hasn't discovered his full potential yet, who's bright and ambitious, but has a whole bunch of challenges he's going to face along the way to fully committing to the heroic path, right? And
Mhm.
there's usually the paragon character, like some wise mentor, the Obi-Wan Kenobi or the Yoda, who's already done that, right? Who's already proven who they are and is fully committed to the path and is the embodiment of their ideals. And that person's usually like mentoring or inspiring them in some way, right? And so if you can make it through that kind of dark night of the soul phase, the forest of cynicism where you start to wonder, can I really do this? Is can I live in this world as imperfect as it is and be the person that I think I'm supposed to be, or should I just give up?
Mhm.
And if you can make it through that and say, yes, I will continue to be the person I am anyway, even in the worst possible conditions, it's how you become that wise mentor paragon character. And then you become really inspiring for other people.
Mhm.
One motif, one theme, one symbol we've used at the Caliban Retreat Center now is that of a lighthouse. Partially because the house kind of looks like that, the way it's positioned on a hill overlooking the road at night. We have all these big windows facing the road, so if we have lights on at night, there's light shooting out onto the road. So it literally looks like a lighthouse. But also
Mhm.
more metaphorically, we're sending a signal out to people that we are not ashamed to hold certain values and ideals that are considered fairly controversial in this part of the world, that we respect individuality, full self-expression, artistic and intellectual and emotional and sexual development. Sex is a huge controversial topic here. They're very conservative, very traditionalist when they talk about these kinds of things. And we're saying to other people, if you are looking for other people who feel the way you do and value the things you do, we are loudly and publicly sending a signal out there that that's who we are and that we're uncompromising about that. We are the paragons who will light the way for you, those of you who are still struggling to embody and haven't gone through your your heroic arc yet to
Mhm.
become the embodiment of your ideals.
Mhm. Well, I can really appreciate Gregory, especially because you're so clear about the foundation of your work and where it's coming from as well. Like what I see you saying is like, I've got the American flag up there. Everybody can see it, even though it's unpopular as well.
Yeah.
Um, Personally, I found that like, my fascination of all things American was a distraction for myself in my own life. But I still, it does challenge me to be like forthright about like, the own source of my own beliefs as well. Um, in Denmark today, it's very unpopular to be a Christian and to
Mhm.
talk publicly about those kinds of things. I'm actually a member of the Russian Orthodox Church. And so that's something that is even worse. It's basically Nazism for a large portion of the population.
Okay.
Um, I guess it's not in Armenia. I don't know what it's like in Armenia there with that.
The Armenian Apostolic Church is the big
Yeah, they
one
have
here. Yeah.
that's the main, yeah, which is a part of the Oriental Orthodox Church, I've understood.
I'm not sure how the hierarchy works, but
Yeah, yeah. There was a schism back in like the third century or the fourth century, I think, between them. Something about the nature of Christ is was Christ fully God or fully man or just
yeah.
one or more than the other or something like that. Anyway, so yeah, I think I think what you're saying is right, and then I think for me what characterizes that, do you say paragon character,
Yeah.
that um what I found is for a long time, and I got to say, this might be the wrong message. I think you'll agree with me, actually. This was the wrong message that I got from American culture, is it's all about me. It's all about what I want, what I believe, what I think, and I just have to impose myself on the world. And so that's what I did. I went out and did that. And because I had a very good upbringing and a lot of good, stable things in my life, then had a lot of success for that for some time. But I got to say that as I got into my 30s, then I started experiencing, luckily, a bit of a humbling in my life. And that thing, I
Hmm.
actually couldn't hold things together. And so I realized, like, and especially when I started this work, I started seeing the problems with men, and I realized, like, I want to do something about men and masculinity. Then I started doing that work and I had some success. Then I realized like I'm gonna need something far bigger than myself to solve this. Because I even had a hard time at that time. I was looking to create a long-term stable relationship and I wasn't even succeeding in that. And so I said, well, I need to find some kind of tradition, some kind of superstructure, some kind of authority that I can base my life on, and that's far bigger and older than I am. And so that's where I landed in Orthodox Christianity. But I think for me, the big problem that I face and a lot of people out there are facing today is that they think they have to do it all themselves. And so that was, my conversion to Orthodox Christianity was very much not based on like some kind of intellectual idea, but it was a concrete, heartfelt experience. When my heart was open for that, then I could have that kind of opening and that experience. And that's what then the experience was one of like, oh, I don't have to figure out it all myself. There's something there else that I can trust in and that I can build things on. And I think that's what we if you when you talk about like authentic being, I think it is
Hmm.
that thing of like that heartfelt knowing in reality of what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. That can create that kind of authentic presence in the world that can really create transformation.
Well, let me tell you something. I do not consider myself a religious person. I would say I have a highly personalized conception of God, which would take a very long time to get into, but I've definitely never aligned myself with any particular religion, though I do study many of them and respect many of them and think they contain valuable stories and lessons. But that what you're describing there is something I have always found admirable and I've even been envious of about certain types of religious people, which is the level of certainty of their convictions.
Mhm.
That they genuinely believe their actions and their values are in line with the intentions of the creator of the universe.
Yeah.
What a profound statement that is.
Yeah.
And to walk around with that conception
Yeah.
is amazing to me. And I think many non-religious people are like jealous of that. It's like, how are you that so fully dedicated and convicted that you believe what you're doing is right in a cosmic kind of way? right? Not just I feel like it's right, it's what I value, it's what I want, but
Yeah.
like no, this is in line with the nature of the universe itself.
Mhm. I think, and to answer that question, I think it's a great question because what I'm coming to realize is that it can only be held over a long period of time if you assume that you're terrible at it, like that you really
Mm.
suck at it. So you kind of like you have had a glimpse of something like the divine, and then you confuse it. You create an idol of it, and then you worship that idol instead of the real thing,
Hmm.
and you constantly lose your path. And so you constantly need to, because we do that. I mean, you've probably had experiences of something transcendent, something that really got the whole world to fit together in a better way for you,
Yeah.
right? And the problem is if you just start relying on that to become your Bible, like the only thing, that's like the fixed word of God, then then you create an idol out of it. And so you have to be constantly open to new input. And that's something that I'm only starting to see more and more how incredibly much I do that myself as well. So it doesn't diminish the experience that I had back then. It just means that I tend to categorize it and reduce it. Um,
Hmm.
and and so I need to be constantly challenged and receiving new input in order to it needs constant refreshal, renewal to be able to
Basically,
actually
whatever
work.
your conception of the divine or the bigger picture of existence is, it is necessarily incomplete.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the
yeah.
blind men trying to describe the elephant.
Yeah, so the picture is like when Moses went up to receive the law of the Ten Commandments on the mountain of Sinai, then he went into the darkness. And so, this is a concept in the Orthodox Church is that it's like you have what's called cacophonic theology, so you can describe God and his qualities, but far more true is actually the apophatic theology, which means that you can never describe God because any description you put on God would be a limitation of,
Yeah,
of what he
sure.
is. He's far greater than any kind of description. And so you have to hold these paradoxical things at the same time and say, well, I have to do something in my life. So I have to have some idea of what virtue is, what goodness is, what the divine is. But I have to know all the time it's very limited. And it's primarily, just as like an animal wouldn't understand, the complexity of human understanding, the gap from me to God is far, far greater than, my pet or something like that would understand of what I'm trying to do in life. Something like that.
I've used that analogy a lot. I have a lot of cats and a dog, and I consider myself a benevolent deity in their life. They can certainly understand me to some degree, to some very limited capacity. Obviously, they interact with me, they have some form of relationship with
Yeah,
me, but how much do
yeah,
they really know about me?
yeah,
Like like in the most practical sense, like when I'm typing on my computer all day, do they understand the slightest thing about what I'm doing there, or do they understand like my life, my philosophy, my values? No, of course not. But they know that I pet them, I feed them, I play with them. They understand those things. Just this
yeah.
tiny, tiny little fraction of my existence.
And they trust you. They trust you and they love you, right? Even
Well,
though
what
they don't
choice do they
completely
have?
understand you as well.
I mean, I could be a cruel and malevolent deity. I could make their lives hell if I were that kind of person. That's how much
Yeah,
power I could have over them, and I
yeah,
choose not to be.
yeah. Or you could be using them as little pawns in your big game of world domination as well.
Yeah, or
And
e-
and
I
and
raise
they could be
rabbits for meat
contributing to like
here.
the downfall of the universe or something like
Sure.
that, right?
Even the animals I raise for meat, because we're kind of homesteading here, I raise rabbits for meat, and many other people here raise animals, but they generally don't treat them very well. And our rabbits, they kind of live in a rabbit paradise. Like they're very well protected, very well fed. They're all extremely friendly. And
Mhm.
then one day, the day comes that I kill one of them and eat it. And they have no way of knowing that that's going to happen, right? How could they, right? And but up until that point, they live the li best lives they possibly could. But
Yeah,
ultimately, they are serving my purpose. The whole reason they exist is because I'm going to eat them someday, and they can't possibly understand that. And if there is a God interfering with our lives and ordering everything, we can't possibly understand its purposes, right? We can only hope that it is kind to us.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and offer ourselves for its will, basically, because it's in control. Paul says this crazy thing in the book of Romans. He says something like, offer yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. And talking about men and women, our, the role of like the husband is to present his. I really like what you said about like, what is it? Men want to, there's some kind of like future thing that you want to aim for and improve
Yeah.
people or something like that. So you have to offer your partner as a pure bride to Christ or something like that. That it's something that I don't even begin to understand, I don't think. But it's a beautiful picture and understanding for me of like why I'm married to my partner. That gives me a lot of
Mhm.
depth and understanding to it, I think.
Line I use very early on in the book that the woman who wrote the forward, Svetlana Savak, particularly really liked was I said that a woman is a noun and a man is a verb. A woman has to
Mhm.
exist in a certain state to feel fulfilled, and a man has to do something in a certain way to feel fulfilled. And those two complement each other really well if you can arrange things just right.
Yeah. Great. Gregory, I've enjoyed this talk a lot, so thanks very much. It's been useful. If you ever find yourself in Denmark, then you're very
Possible.
welcome to come by. It would be great to compare notes on running a little homestead or something like that, community center out in the countryside. And I'd definitely love to come by if I somehow ever make it to Armenia
Yeah,
and see your
sure.
place as well. So yeah, but yeah, thanks very much for your talk. You have a website. I'll put the links in the description if anybody's interested in looking
Sure.
more into your work and what you're doing. Anything else you want to finish off before we close off the conversation here?
Um, I guess I would just say that I'm a bit unconventional as an author, that I tend to write on a lot of different topics, or at least topics that superficially seem different. Because I've written 7 books now. Some are about business, some are about travel, this new one's about love.
Mhm.
One was about economics, right? Like, which isn't what most authors do. They tend to specialize in a niche. But actually, if you dig beneath the surface, there's a lot of common underlying themes in all of them. And the strongest one is enabling human conscious self-expression in various domains, right? And that's, as far as I can tell, all that personal development is. How do you achieve the ideal of conscious self-expression and embody your virtues, right? Whether that's in the romantic domain, the entrepreneurial domain, or something else entirely, right? And that's
It's
everything.
not the aim that I have, I'd say, but
What's
I have
yours?
many different aims. Um, for me, I see what really changes people's lives is human connection, experiencing human
Okay.
connection, like
Would that
building
not
build.
fall under the definition of highest conscious self-expression? Connecting with other people?
Well, it could be, but it could be something else. It could be somebody thinks that that's if they, write a book or become a musician, or it could be earning a lot of money or something like that,
Yeah.
right? That would be their kind of fantasy or vision of self-expression. So it really depends on what they're aiming at, I would
Or
say.
like if love is shared identification, then even that is too. It's not contradictory to be selfish in the sense that you care about yourself, but you also care deeply about the people you love, because to you it's the same thing. To say that I'm in love with a woman is to put her as a priority over myself because she is a part of myself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that's a nuance that a lot of people won't necessarily get. Like we live in a highly individualized culture where people are very selfishly focused, narcissistic focused. For me, a lot of it is to get over the self-centered. A lot of guys come in with this very kind of like. For me, it's like I have a 4-year-old. He just thinks about his own needs and wants all the time, and so
Hmm.
I see it
Yeah.
as a bit of a sign of immaturity that people are very self-focused a lot of the time. And what I see is that when guys make progress, it's because they start thinking about um, other people more than just their own needs. And for a lot of people need to think about their own needs because they're struggling so much. But the more people are able to get past that, and me, it's just in my relationship with my wife. In the beginning of our relationship, I wanted her to understand me a lot. And like that's what led a lot to our conflicts, is because I wanted her to understand me. I wanted my, self-expression. I wanted to feel that. And what I've realized now is it's not about me and my thoughts and my ideas and them being expressed. It's more about something happening that's, yeah, a little bit more mystical between us, not just centered in me putting something out into the world.
Well, it's reciprocal. To understand and be understood is a requirement of love, I
Yeah,
would say.
yeah, yeah. And that was definitely my limitation, is I forgot the other side of it. Yeah, yeah. Great. Well, we can definitely discuss things a lot,
We could.
Gregory. But
Yeah.
thanks a
Well,
lot.
read the rest of the book when you have time, and send me a message when you're done.
Yeah, we'll see if I get around to it, and maybe we can have a follow-up conversation sometime as well. Let's see how this one lands as well.
Sure.
Okay.